Ladies and gentlemen, Hebrews and Shebrews, welcome to the Life Podcast, where we inspire you to thrive as peculiar people in a modern world. And today we're doing that by talking to S.K. Fox, Sister Kate. And we're going to talk to her about living off-grid, which she's done for a long time. We're going to talk to her about the Torah movement, which she's been in for a long time. And we're going to talk to her about YouTube and producing content for YouTube, which she and her husband have been doing for a long time and successfully.
This episode of the Life Podcast is brought to you by Truth Tracks. Truth Tracks are these small, beautifully illustrated comics full of scripture that use stories to tell why it is that we're doing different things that we're doing that we see in the scriptures, like, different, like the holidays in the Bible, or like wearing tzitzit, or like eating biblically clean. And it puts all of the scriptures at your fingertips that you want to have when somebody's asking you about these things. And you can just hand this to them and they can read it on their own time and look up the scriptures and kind of understand what you're saying. And they're tiny, you can keep them with you. And just kind of handy. It's not like a big thing to ask of someone. It's not saying, hey, read this whole book or watch this whole movie. It's saying, read this. This will kind of explain where I'm coming from.
And so without further ado, I give you SK. SK, welcome to the Life Podcast.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for spending time out of your busy day to come here, because it's not always easy to get here.
It's a pleasure to be here, though.
Oh, thank you.
You have a lot to talk about, I think, especially when it comes to not just living off grid and YouTubing, but also Torah, about coming into Torah. And that's usually how we start things on this show. So if you would like, could you give us your testimony, maybe how you got saved and how you came into the Torah?
Sure. Yeah. I do think I've got a little bit of perspective because we've been doing this now 12 years. I won't go into the whole history of Pastor Joe and SK's faith walks. I was a Catholic, then I was an agnostic, and then I met my husband in college, and he did a little researching on Mormonism. And so there was a short period when we were actually Mormons. And then as time goes by, he became the pastor of a Christian, non-denominational, tiny little white country church. And he was a pastor there about 7.5 years. And in that time frame, we found out so much more about the faith because, faith in general, the Catholic Church is kind of cold. Sorry. I had a brief stint going to a Church of God in Christ, so I saw Pentecostalism, and I was like, oh, faith can be happy. Faith can be fun. People can be excited about this thing. And that flavored us. But in that Christian church, what we did, we were starting from scratch. And so the Lord brought to us people who had some experience in different things. One of the first people who showed up knew about, we have to organize your church. We have to, what is the name going to be? What is your rules going to be? How do you want it set up? And so he helped us with that. Then he also helped us with our first Bible study. He had taught it before, so he volunteered. Then a lady shows up who had not played the piano in a while, but had just gotten done being on a worship team and had piano in her background. And so she started to provide the worship, with a real idea of how it should go. I had started trying to play piano at the beginning of this church too. My daughter was taking lessons and I was like, hey, I can kind of understand what they're doing here. And so the worship literally started with me on an old piano with one finger playing songs. And then a man showed up who played mandolin, and another gentleman who was really good violinist. And so from groundwork, we got worship, we got organization, we got Bible study, and we learned, PJ and I learned in those Bible studies, because his background had been Protestant in and out, like Methodist a little bit here, a little bit there. So there was a lot he and I could learn too. Then someone walks in and says, you don't have the Holy Spirit here. And we're like, what do you mean? Okay, what is the Holy Spirit? And delve into that and find out about it. And then ask for that to come into the church body. And that experience went from ground zero to, and a church with 5 members, to a vibrant, alive church with 80 people attending, to a point where the church was full and we might have had to go to 2 services. And right at that time is when the father brought Torah up into our view. And it was a homeschooling mom. She was saying, the homeschooling moms are starting to look into the Jewish feasts. What do you know about that? We don't know anything. So we start delving into it. And then Pastor got messages in different ways about Shabbat, about Sabbath. So he started to study that. And then Jim Staley's video got recommended to us, Truth or Tradition. We watched all of that and went, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And so the father brought Torah in our view, and at the same time, my husband is trying to, in his sermons, pass on that knowledge to a group of people who were very non-denominational Christian body, if you think about it. Sorry, that's my dog in the background.
Hey, we're on a working homestead here.
So ridiculous. Anyway, and we were not able to answer the questions that people had about, what about 2 Timothy? What about Galatians 4? And we were like, we don't know. We just started this little walk ourselves. And at the same time this is all happening, the church starts to split up. It starts to go away. And we are starting to learn more about Torah through Pastor Dow, Charles Dow. He has a big presence online, and other Torah teachers. And it coincided with my husband retiring from the military, having a contractor job for the government, and being tired of that too, and wanting to change his career, as well as our faith is changing. And so in the middle of all that, this property that we're on right now had been bought by us as a young married couple 10, 15 years earlier, right after he started in the military, because we wanted to be outdoor when we retired. We just knew we were that kind of people. And so we bought this property then for $258 an acre, which is, I know, then was not super cheap. Now that's super cheap. And we just made the payments on it over time to an old couple. And eventually the husband passed away. So we tripled our payments so that the wife would be paid off before she too passed, and was able to enjoy the money that, selling this to us meant to them. And so, as you've heard in stories, we forgot we owned it. Sometimes we would be so busy with military life and raising children and everything. And every once in a while we have property down there. We probably ought to go visit that sometime. So that became, well, we're going to retire. My husband now wants to look into living in community. And then when you look at Torah and how everyone in the beginning of the Bible lived, they were living in clans and groups. And so it kind of, after a visit out to Straightway, which is a faith-based community, we thought, wow, that looks really cool. Living in, community with other people with your own faith and wanting to get back to the land and stuff. Where could we do that? Where is a piece of property that we would have access to that we could do that on? Oh my gosh, we have one. So that's kind of how we wound up moving down here. And as I told you, there was nothing here. It was rocks and trees, which there's still a lot of them here, but we had to build the infrastructure up. And so we were doing that in a physical way, and at the same time, learning Torah alongside that. And when you read in the word, seek ye the old paths, that's what we felt like we were doing. And also on that path, I had just read, I watched Kirk Cameron's documentary called Monument. And I think he only did it like one night, and you buy an online ticket and you can watch this thing. And now I think it's available on CDs and stuff. But he traced the Pilgrims. And I'll try to make this story short. It's a long story of how the Pilgrims came about. But literally, they were in Scotland. They wanted to read the Bible for themselves. King James of the King James Bible was illegal. And so they went from like England and Scotland to the Netherlands. They were very, very illegal. They'd been jailed a couple of times, and all they wanted to do was live in community and live by the Bible. And so we felt like we were running concurrently with that, seriously. And we came down in November. They left England in November. They show up around the midwinter time where they, Plymouth Rock or wherever it was in the Northeast. And so that was kind of, I mean, if you put all that together, it's a very big, compelling picture to that this faith is right, that we're seeing truth in the word. And also, I've explained this to other people too. I'm an English literature major. That's what I majored in college. And so as an English literature major, you study books. You study characters. You study themes, settings, plots, all of that. And in reading the Bible from front to back, you see that it is one book. Even though people have said you got the Old Testament and the New Testament and Jesus's message is different, no, it's not. When you look at it as a whole work, it's the same God. He has the same rules. His people are people who believe he is God and follow him and follow his rules. And when you don't, Dad gets mad and he smacks you. And you either learn from that and straighten up and get back on the path, or you're going to fall away, and now you're not going to enjoy the blessings he has for his people. Very simply put. And so the Torah walk, it's almost like being born again. Because when you get Yeshua, when you get Jesus the first time, you're on fire. You are elated. You can't wait to spread that, to tell somebody, wow, you know, I can be forgiven for my sins, and there's hope for a life everlasting, and all sorts of really great messages. And when you start seeing Torah tied into that and find out, wait, I can have an even deeper relationship with the same God and still have promises of blessings and understand where cursings can happen and then avoid those things, it makes the whole New Testament even more clear that it's not just everything is okay and you're free to do whatever you want, but that there are rules that you can abide by and stay in the path and be in the blessings without having to veer out again. And so that whole Torah walk journey is super exciting. And all these things in the word become clear when you think about Jesus is going to leave 99 and go for 100th lost lamb. For some people, that may not make any sense. But when you think about if the way is that narrow path and you've got 99 of you already on it and you're good there, he doesn't have to worry about you. He can leave you right where you are and go try to get that 100th off the path, off the belief, and bring them into the 100. And how the 99 will go, hey, welcome, come in, the water's warm. You know, so that was a really, really exciting time for us in our faith walk. And we were between 40 and 50 years old. For a lot of people, that's a time when they're like, I don't know if my first 20 years I used effectively. Now I'm 40 and 50, and what's my life going to look like? It tied in with that. Also, very exciting. Life is going to be even better because the Father promises in his word, you will have a calm and peaceful life if you're walking on that path. Who doesn't want that when you're a grandma, right? I had my exciting times. I'm ready to bounce my grandkids on my knee and have a peaceful, quiet life. So Torah just basically came through prayer and reading the word, if I put it down to a very simple way to explain it. And another thing that happens, because spiritual things happen when you are in communication with God. So when we moved here, there was a gentleman down in the town that we have. It's a very small town. His little sign above his driveway was Shalom Acre. And so someone who was here with us at the time stopped and talked to that gentleman and found out he kept Torah, was not Jewish, had come out of a church called the Worldwide Church of God that was, I think, somewhere on Michigan, around the Great Lake area, but in the 60s. which was very rare at that time, of course, that a Baptist church, I think the pastor was Baptist, found Torah and said, oh no, we need to start keeping this stuff. And then after that pastor passed, his son became the pastor of the church, and he went back to being Baptist. So all the Torah sheep from that church split and went their own separate ways. Well, that man was one of them. His name was Ed. And then in the area where Bear is was Jeannie and Al, and they were from the same church. And we're having a Torah congregation in that area. And so when we moved down here and we found them, they could explain stuff to us about Torah that we didn't know, because they'd been keeping it for a while. And they had been like little pods. And I know there's people now who are like, I'm the only one in my town. I'm the only Torah keeper. Well, these people from the Worldwide Church of God were those lost sheep who were now their own little entities in the midst of all these other people who didn't get it. And here we show up.
Wow.
They were in their 80s and came out to Sukkot here just to talk to us. And you know, it's not easy. And then we ran into a few other elderly people in our area who were willing to come out here in those early years, which it was physically difficult for them, but they could also share with us their testimony and how, you know, in Torah, what do you want to do and what don't you want to do and how, and, you know, what's a recipe for matzah and just, you know, different things. And so that was also part of that experience. And then I looked at it this way. He was 7 years, my husband was 7 years a Christian non-denominational pastor. And then he was 7 years a Torah pastor here. So that's two complete spiritual perfection numerology for the Bible, as one pastor and then another pastor. And then he retired. So I was like, I could see the pattern of the word in that, as well as everything else that was happening to us. So that's it in a nutshell, Luke.
This episode of the Life Podcast is brought to you by The Truth Reformation 2.0. If the Way documentary is like an appetizer, The Truth Reformation 2.0 is like the entree. This book answers every question that you'll probably be asked about why it is that you're trying to not eat pork and shellfish anymore, and why you're not doing church on Sunday, you're doing Saturday, and why you're not doing Easter, you're doing Passover. The thing that I love about it is that it's set up with these contradictions. The mainstream theology says this, the Bible seems to say this. How do we make this all work? Is there a way to read the Bible where there are no internal contradictions? And then aside from that, the book has these illustrations to illustrate key concepts, and it has these Venn diagrams. I'm a very visual learner, so it's cool seeing these theological concepts distilled into images. That is helpful for me. And it's also kind of fun and kind of cheeky, and it's not so heavy and serious. It's like just a really great read full of scripture and endnotes and answers. So if that sounds interesting, you should definitely check out this book. Go to thewaydoc.com. That's theway, D-O-C, like documentary.com.
So did you kind of see yourself as new pilgrims in a way?
I saw us paralleling the walk that the Pilgrims did. And if you watch that documentary Monument, the head of the Pilgrim body, because there were 100 who showed up and then 50 died in the first year, so you have a remainder, and that's who's establishing, I'm trying to remember what they called their community at the time. Pilgrim's Progress keeps going through my mind, but that's not it. Anyway, their head was not the original pastor of that body. He stayed back in the Netherlands, which at the time was the only place in Europe that would let you be religiously what you wanted. You were either a Protestant or a Catholic. And if you were in a Catholic country and said, I'm a Protestant, they might behead you or set you on fire, right? And so they were hiding out as illegals in the Netherlands. It might have been Holland. So their pastor opted to stay back. So his congregation, along with some businessmen, are the ones who showed up on the shores and got out and established their little community. And they started reading the word, and they wanted to be like the Acts 2 church, which is the people who, right, walked and talked with Yeshua, but now we have to establish ourselves as a body. That's what the Pilgrims were trying to do. And at the end of about 50 years they lived there. And they had a tribe, a Narragansett tribe. No, maybe not. Massasoit was the chief of a tribe in the area, and his tribe had been wiped out. They had been a big tribe, and they had gotten a disease, and they made small, and the Narragansetts, who were just to their west, were pressing on them. And that's why Massasoit joined up with the Pilgrims, and they were allies. And for 50 years, the head, Massasoit, and the man, I think it's William Bradford, were friends, and their communities got along, and they traded, and they did all sorts of things together. But after they died, their sons started fighting, and that's where the French and Indian War kind of gets started in that thing. The whole thing falls apart. Anyway, William Bradford, at the end of his life, said, I am convinced you do not understand the Bible unless you learn it in Hebrew. And he has Yahweh on his cemetery stone. He has Yud He Vav He on his burial stone. So I could not help but feel like they were onto a truth that kind of disappeared as, that friendship falls apart, and now the Dutch and the English and all sorts of people are coming into the coast and everything else. But that they had traveled across an ocean to establish a community based on their faith, and that we had come from different states here to establish a community based on the same faith, with the same idea. You need to understand the Hebrew root of this story and why people are doing what they're doing and what the context is for the relationship they're having with God.
I think Tom Bradford, who says he's likely related to William Bradford, he thinks the same thing. He thinks that William Bradford was doing a lot more Torah things than have been said in the past.
Right. And if you think about what we celebrate as Thanksgiving and the story they tell of the natives helping these pilgrims, strangers. Here are foods we eat. Turkey is, an American food, squash, things like that. That was part of their everyday diet. And these Europeans who showed up, don't know anything about the land, don't know what to eat. Half of them starved to death. And it's in fall. What feast does that sound like to you, brother? Does that not sound like Sukkot? Yeah. Right? And Americans have a tradition of camping out in the woods in tents in the fall and cooking over fires. Right? I mean, it just kind of all made a lot of sense to us. And Tom Bradford, we've met him. There was a lot of parallel stuff going on there, too. They just were in a different area of the country. And so it kind of brings to mind the fact also, because you and I talked about this before, the movement used to be pretty small. I mean, when your wife was helping make the way, there were 5 million Torah believers, I think, in America. I think.
Seems like a lot already.
Comparatively, it seems like, and it could have been worldwide. But I think there are a lot more now. I really do, just because of our personal experience and how much, even in our area, the body of believers has grown. Are they all the same? No. They have their differences. They have their thing about, Zed seats and whether you're going to do that and covering your head and all that stuff. But who believe that Jesus is the Messiah and who believe God is Yahweh, I think there's a much larger number, and I think it's really exciting.
It is very exciting. When, going back in your story, when he was teaching at the church and it started to break apart, was that because he came into the Torah and he was teaching that and people were like, how did they react to?
They were very angry. They were like, this is not true. The law is not in effect. We do not have to keep anything that's in the front half of the Bible. It's all Old Testament. Jesus came and he did away with all of it. And so they had verses that they would bring up and we would say, okay, I need to look into that. But we couldn't immediately have answers because we had just figured it out ourselves. And so because we didn't have answers, it became really confusing. And there were also people working behind the scenes who were undermining us as the pastoral couple. They didn't like what we were doing, and so they started meeting secretly. And ironically, on Shabbat, they would meet and talk about this stuff. We're like, you're basically keeping Shabbat now, so why wouldn't you keep it as a body together in the church? And they'll have their side of their story too. They will say we joined a cult. They did not like Pastor Dal. He's I consider him like a shofar for Torah and Yahweh. He has very strong opinions, and our group didn't like that. And so it was just hard. It was hard for them. It was hard for us. And at the same time that was going on, there were other people who were coming to Torah who were seeking us out even there. And for a little while, when we moved down here, there was a group meeting with our son still in that building of Torah believers. So,
Wow. Most of your family, how did they react? How did your kids react?
The interesting thing about our children was our one daughter, our middle daughter, had been, they all were reading the Bible. They were all in the church. But she had like a Bible encyclopedia book, I think, that she had been reading. And when we said, hey, we're going to start keeping these, she was excited. She's like, oh, I read about it in there. I think we should do that thing. And so she was down for that. And then our son had been here. So he had been right along with it and getting it as we were. And so that was simple and easy. And he still keeps Torah. And our youngest was the one who was most, not distance from us, but just having different experience being younger than us. And so she was here and everything, but it was not, let me put it this way. It didn't split our family apart, one. And for the most part, a large part of what we believe makes sense to them, and they keep it in their own way. And the other thing about even our children, or even anyone else's family, we were in our mid-40s or early 50s when we got this truth. So if someone doesn't get it right away, I don't get worried about it. I didn't get it. I didn't understand this at 20. And so I like to tell people who have the benefit of understanding it when they're younger, you're going to have a jump start on it, which is great for you. Like your children won't have done Halloween and your children will not have done Christmas. Whereas we did all of that stuff and we kind of cut it off midway for our children. So it's different for each person. But yeah, our kids were fine. My mom was not excited, but she's been a lifelong Catholic. And she understands Judaism. She likes Jewish people in general, but she just was like, what are you guys doing? You, a military couple, what are you doing all of a sudden, right? You've become full-blown into your faith. And I think she found that kind of strange. My older brother and my younger brother are fine with me as a person, and I'm fine with them as people. But, we don't intersect. They live in other sides of the country and everything else. So it wasn't as disturbing, I don't think, for my family as it was for the church body, because for them it was blasphemy. Baptists are taught, all that stuff's done away with. You don't have to worry about that. And eventually, over time in studying the word, I can answer them now.
Yeah, having these verses that are go-to for, I know they're cherry-picked, but it's because people think, well, the reason I've never heard of that before. The reason I don't do that is because of X, like Y and Z that Paul said. But often, since they haven't had these questions, they've never gone through and asked, do these verses really make the law null and void? Right. Do they really make it not apply to modern day believers? And yeah, upon examination.
Right. And then you can find Romans 3:31 is an excellent verse to let people say, because it says, does this mean we do away with the law? No, we establish the law. If you establish something, it's not done away with. It's established. So it's just, but I didn't see it. And so I think the Father says for sure, I open people's eyes and I open their ears to see the truth, but I also close people's eyes and ears because I think he knows they wouldn't see the truth or they're not open to the truth. And so it's not really up to, I mean, we cast seeds. We will sit and have conversations with people and say, okay, what about these verses? But if they don't get it, then they don't get it. And so it's not going to do you or them any good to try to keep convincing and keep convincing. And it can happen at any time. Like I said, we were much older when we found this truth. So
Yeah, you can't argue people into it. The Holy Spirit or the Ruach has to wake people up.
right, and let them see it.
But I was having a discussion with a friend of mine who used to believe this way and doesn't anymore. And after our discussion, I gave my perspectives, which and everyone watching probably knows, and he gave his, which all mainstream Christians who watch this also will know. Mark 7 is what we were talking about. And in the end, after the discussion, I was on the way back home and I thought about Deuteronomy 26 and 27 and 28, where you have these kind of just very plain blessings and curses that are lined out. And it all is drawn back to, these are the words I'm giving you. Do them and you'll have all these blessings. Break them and you'll have all of these curses. And it's choose. And so I hate it when people don't see it, because I know that Yah is in charge of everything. He's in charge of the good and the bad that happens to all of us. And when we either don't realize that or we snub it, there are curses for it. And when we realize it, or we just accidentally do it, I think even, like people are allergic to pork, sometimes they accidentally avoid it. Or people just have the weekends off, they aren't working on Shabbat. I think that they still get the benefit of those blessings because they're keeping this stuff. I don't know, oftentimes.
Right. Well, and when you think about, because I think there's an even bigger question. There's an even bigger way to look at your faith. Faith is believing without seeing. So that's important to remember, because you can get into the nitty and the gritty of, well, scientifically prove that this is possible. Like, can you turn flesh into, bread into flesh or whatever? Can you part a sea? Can you actually part a sea? Right? Sometimes science supports there are ways that can happen with wind and so on. And, if you want an absolute proof, you're probably not going to find it in the way you're looking for it. So faith is understanding there's some of this stuff that may be beyond how you can explain it, may not make perfect sense to you. But the thing about my husband and I is we have the benefit of having lived in other countries, seen other faiths, seen the consequences, seen the beliefs, and when compared to all the other faiths on the planet, this one made the most sense to us. So we chose it. And I think you use the word, you choose, right? You choose to believe this stuff. But it's not just a personal choosing, because a lot of common law in a lot of countries is based on the Ten Commandments. If you look at cultures that allow theft, that allow adultery, that allow murder, and it's fine, you can do these things, the actual culture is pretty chaotic. It's very difficult to live without some surety in your life. And if you're sure, no one's going to steal from you, no one's going to murder, no one's going to try to take your wife from you, that you're going to honor your parents, you are going to refuse to get involved in non-biblical, non-God-blessed activities, like burning your children and stuff to get more money or success, or killing your animals to do things like that. It is a peaceful, quiet life. It is a life that you can build a family on, a clan on, a tribe on, and you are a good neighbor. You don't want neighbors who are going to steal from you, murder you, take your property lines, kill your animals. I mean, it's just practical living, even, really. And so, like, agreeing with what you just said, why wouldn't you want that? Why wouldn't you want that?
It's this baseline morality.
Yeah.
And it's also drawn up by the creator of everything that we see. So we know that it's better than anything we can come up with.
Right.
And we know that it's better than anything that whoever's running this denomination or this denomination can come up with. Right. So until all the denominations are totally in sync on their morality, which they aren't,
Right.
then it's not objective. It's flim-flammy. And we need that objective morality penned by the creator. It's the only thing that's reliable.
Right. And the funny thing about the word morality and morals, people will sling it around without realizing it's in relation to the faith and the Bible. That's where morals come from. That is the basis of morality as we know it. And they want to think that you can have that without those basic rules, but you really can't. If you've got those morals, then you're in, like you said, you're in line with the Lord, whether you knew it or not.
You're right.
Right? So, yeah.
Can we talk about being off grid and homesteading a little bit? And how did you guys end up doing that in the first place?
Okay. So it's funny it's such a big question, big picture. We both were outdoorsy as children. I spent several years running around mountains barefoot and horseback riding and doing all kind of stuff. And my mom was a gardener and his dad was a gardener. So there were some basic skills there, but then he was also a scout, a Boy Scout. I was not a Girl Scout, but I became a Girl Scout leader. So I did all that, camping with little kids and cooking outside. Then we moved to a third world country for 18 months and there was no hot water in the house. So I washed dishes that I boiled the water and sweated into while I was in this foreign country. It was 100 degrees and 90% humidity like every day. And so there was some basic, we couldn't run the power very much because it was expensive, just live by fans, things like that happening as adults. He was also a Boy Scout leader. And so he did that stuff. And then he was in the military. So he camped and wandered around the woods and did all kind of things for that. And so when we knew we were going to move onto this land and we knew it was bare bones, nothing here, it's like, well, we have all the skills. That's not a problem for us. We can come down here and cook over a fire. We've done it a million times. We can heat up water over a propane stove or over a fire. I've done it in the past. And also finances came into it. I mean, trying to clear property, have roads built, have power lines brought in, have running water hookup and all that other stuff costs money. And at the time we were doing this, we had at least a kid or two still in college, and a house that we were paying a mortgage on. And so finances came into it and we didn't have a lot of money to spend making the infrastructure more updated than it was. And so once we started down that path, when you're not paying a monthly electric bill, when you're not paying a water bill, if the power goes out in a storm, but yours is still up, it seems simpler and easier, especially if you already have a house that you're paying all those bills on anyway, at least to me. And so I told my husband, like, I don't really want to get another bill that I have to pay, to do the finances for the house. And so we kind of opted to just stick with off-grid stuff. And here we are.
That's great. Wow.
12 years down the road and still going strong. We're physically hoping we can hold out even longer. Let's just say that.
then I won't pursue that line of questioning of like, what's the other option? Have you thought about, do you think you'll go back to your house that you have, or we don't
know right now if that is viable, but our son is going to move down here come this summer. And so eventually there'll probably be a handoff, but we will be very happy to have their help while they're down here, right? And while we're still able to. So, yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for people considering a similar jump? Let's say you're exact same age, when you moved here, you're exact same, like it's a couple, and bare bones, like you're just coming to a hill, the hill with woods. What recommendations do you have? Anything like
what a
you would
good
avoid?
lead in, right?
Yeah.
I have a whole book I wrote on that. And let me introduce that now. It's called Homestead Hints. Can you see it? Yep, good. SK Fox, that's me. And the book is meant to be like Cliff Notes, because there are other books you can get about homesteading that are encyclopedias, like Carla Emery's Encyclopedia of Country Living and so on. But if you want something short, easy to read, that's why I wrote this. And then inside it, the chapters, there's only about 10 chapters. It talks about before you start homesteading, the land that you're going to buy, plans for your little slice of heaven, animals, gardening, organizing your homesteading life, stuff like that. There's even a little bit of calendar suggestions in there that do it by year and like by month. And it's inexpensive. It's only $13. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all that stuff. So if you're thinking of homesteading, there's very basic tips in here, including a list of 25 homesteading tips that I wrote after living off grid for 25 years. So they're in the very back of it for you guys. So I recommend that.
That's great. That is great.
Thanks. The other thing that I like to tell people, you do not, nowhere in the word does it say you have to start from scratch, because even though our faith and our homestead stuff happened together, the best way to do it is find some property or some homestead that already has infrastructure. If it's got a house, great. If it's got a barn, great. If it's got gardens already, great. If it's got fencing, bonus. To save yourself time and effort, especially at our age, try to find something that's already been established and that you can move into and then take over. I also tell people you can get skills for homesteading even if you're living in the city. You can try growing plants on your balcony of your apartment. You can take classes for fire building or how to put in a fence, or watch YouTube videos, or even people will have classes on things like this, on homestead tips and how to build a house or a cob house or a straw house. Go there, get that information, watch those videos, talk to people who've already done it, and get their little suggestions. And you can start from an RV pulled out on an acre with a little coop that you've thrown together with pallets. You can start there. You really can. You don't have to have a fortune to do this. But if you have some money, then save yourself time and get something established. So
that seems smart. We started with like the greenfield thing too, where there's just like nothing but. Anyway,
you learn
that's all
a lot,
we could do.
right?
That's all we had.
And you learn a lot starting from scratch. You do. You learn a lot starting from scratch, but you can also shortcut that if you need to.
Yes. Pay the money, buy the house that exists. It's better.
Right? Have a driveway, not make it, all that. But
yeah. Okay. So what got you and your husband interested in YouTube, and why did you start making YouTube videos as well?
Okay, good question. My husband, he got suggestions from various and sundry different people. And now their names, there's a lady who wrote a book about backyard gardening and so on, and he's done it on his channel. He recommended her. She gave him her plan on how she did her videos and how he should lay things out, because what he wanted to do was supplement income and change from being military to in charge of his own life, right? And so I think it was Pastor Dowell who suggested to him, try videos, because he already had an online presence. And so he started a blog to write about prepping and survivalism, which has always been one of his interests. He's always been interested in those things and has read books by survivalists and so on. And we were actually on other people's websites who were also preppers even before he started his own. So we kind of had an idea of how it was going to go. And so when he started his own, he could talk about what he wanted to on there. You know, here's a post on how you start a fire in the woods. Here's, you know, a post on knives and everything. And then from that, he wrote his book about, oh gosh, his title's so long, Prepping Families for a Stronger America. That's just my version of it. Anyway, it's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble too. Joseph Fox. In writing that book, he wanted that to be a supplemental income. Well, then someone suggested, why don't you try uploading YouTube videos? So he did. He started, his very first video was on knives, and he sat down and planned it and laid all his collection out and did the video. And he could recommend his blog and his book by his YouTube channel. And so it all started to work together as a way to get people interested, show them how things worked, and also get his book out to the public and kind of his interest. Because on this property for 12 or 13 years, on his website, Viking Preparedness originally, he would find out if people would like to come out and do a Bob campout. Had a Bob campout for like 12 or 13 years where people around the country could say, hey, I'm interested in seeing if my Bob will work. So he came down here. I was only on like one or two of them.
What is Bob for people who have no idea?
Right. Bug out bag. Right. If you have an emergency in your area, you've pre-packed a bag that has the essential things you're going to need when you leave your house to get you to somewhere else. Maybe you're going to have to walk on foot. Maybe your car got caught in a fire in California and burned to a crisp, and now you're walking to whatever safe place you're going to. But they came down here, and that's where he met some of the people that you have talked to, like Zach Bauer was here doing these bug out bag campouts, and he was also in on the Torah walk at that time. And now, well, and he did the New to Torah channel. That was really instrumental in a lot of people getting the basics, especially Baptists. So that's a whole nother side conversation. But the bug out bag campouts allowed people to discuss their equipment, to have faith-based conversations around the campfire, because it inevitably would come up, and has brought some of the people that we still know. We have a friend, Ray, who's moving into the area, who started out as an Assembly of God guy and very involved in his church, who never got in on those conversations. She just sat and listened and got Torah. And so, again, all this stuff works concurrently. It all works together. So the YouTube channel helped get the word out about his prepping, but also he started to film himself doing his sermons in here, actually in there originally. So not only was it getting prepping out, but it was also getting the word out and Torah out. And the way my husband would do his sermons, it was basically just read from the book, start at the beginning of whatever book he was in and read each line and explain and talk about. So he only ever in his career as a pastor got through like 12 books, because they're so full, that they're so deep. But it was excellent teachings, and by having them filmed and people able to watch them, you can learn about Torah from those sermons. And it's not just opinion, it's reading the verses and the words line by line. And so that's kind of how that all grew, especially for him. And there were conferences we got invited to. We met lots of different people, and the YouTube channel was more about the prepping stuff. And and I still think there's a need for that. I really do. We still have natural disasters happening, and we still have people who go from everything is normal to maybe their house burned down. I mean, if you look at Maui, that happened so fast. And LA even. I mean, our Western countries have fires and have had big fires forever. But in modern times, I don't know that people realize that and keep their finger on that. And so people get caught, or even the hurricanes. The hurricane in North Carolina, South Carolina, that whole region. I mean, that's probably not something that they thought was going to happen. But historically, it probably has happened in the past. And so it's like...
And will happen in the future.
And so how do you react to that? How do you plan for that? How do you try to survive that? And that's why I think prepping is important, that people be aware of what could happen in your area and what is your plan to deal with those things happening. So the YouTube channel grew, I think, because it was important. And there are other... You met Jason, the Angry Prepper. His whole prepping thing is for New York City. And that's important too. It's going to have its own issues. Like 9/11 happened while he was on that fire department. That's a huge thing. But the Shofar Mountain channel happened to sort of... It was an idea to kind of do the community thing there, but it really ended up being more just about spreading the word and explaining the Bible there. So... my channel started because my husband suggested I do it, because he saw benefit in people who are starting from scratch, documenting what they were going through. So if someone else was going to think about getting off grid, and it was sort of a movement. I mean, definitely as the 2010 to 2020 timeframe, and really even the turn of the century timeframe, there were a lot of people feeling the need to get back to the land. And it even happened in Australia. It happens around the world. So he thought it was important to document what we were doing. It included the faith and the community and the off-grid living. And so the early videos on the channel blend those three things together. And it was tough. I mean, off-grid community living was really, really basic. We used a well hand pump to get water to wash clothes with, and had to boil it for washing dishes, and there was all sorts of things going on there. But it showed that even, and we weren't really suburban, but other people who came in at that time were suburban, could do these things. We just have it all in our DNA, but modern life it's not necessary in modern life. But when you're forced to, you can cook over a fire, you can boil water to drink, you can do all kinds of things. It's there. And so by having those videos on the channel, we could spread the information about Torah, about keeping feasts and so on. We could teach people, this is how we're washing our clothes outdoors in a pot with, a thing stirring it and then rinsing it out by hand and hanging it out, and reach other people to share that knowledge. That really is still my channel. I've got a few videos that I call just for fun, but almost all of my videos are lessons, historical or physical or spiritual, to educate people and also let you shortcut some of the difficult stuff or save money.
Tell us the name of your channel as well.
It's Sister Kate, Shofar Mountain. I started it as For God Live. That was what it was originally. But we were given advice about, no, make it, get your name in there and some other things. So I changed the name of it. But yeah, that's my channel now. Sister Kate, Shofar Mountain.
That's great.
Yeah.
And that's where we are now, right?
Yeah.
This is Shofar Mountain.
And
okay.
I still do live streams, and I love having people come on there and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I'm from wherever, and ask questions if you have questions about any of these things on the channel, off-grid living or Torah life or, being retired. I love that. And I love when people can give their knowledge too. I have some people on my channel who are really good gardeners, and they throw out these little gems in these live streams. I'm like, dude, you should be writing that down. This is the way to do these things, how to grow better flowers and vegetables and everything. So yeah, if you're out there, you all come to a live stream sometime.
It's YouTube really was world changing. The way that I approach anything has changed because of YouTube.
Yeah.
The reason I could build the tiny house that we're in is probably largely because of YouTube and people sharing that information. So thank you, and thank your husband. Thank you guys for like guiding people through learning the lessons that you learned.
You're welcome. And we're not the only ones. I mean, we're definitely a flavor, but I agree with you that if you think of Google, how that changed, just having the ability to enter into a computer anything you want information on. It's like the Encyclopedia Britannica put into a computer, only way better. And so you can do that. I think that changed our world. And I think YouTube changed the world too, because TV was not the only media now. You didn't have to sit in front of a TV and only watch programs that were on this thing. You can literally watch a video on anything. And I think that has made the world a smaller place when you think about it, because now you can know stuff about what people in Nepal are doing and they can know what you're doing and compare it. I think there's a benefit to the information out there, but I also think it's a two-edged sword, because there's disinformation out there as well. And you have to educate yourself in any way you can, through books, through talking to people, to be able to sift through it, to say, oh, come on, that can't be true. Because if you don't get the real information, you can fall for anything. And I don't want that for people either. That's why I try to make mine as truthful as I can. I'm not scamming. I'm not trying to get you to buy anything, Luke. No, sir. I have nothing out here to sell you, and I'm not going to try to, send you down a wrong path. But yeah, I think YouTube was a very interesting concept, that creators can make money by being effective in the message they're coming across as. And when you think about things like ASMR, I would have never imagined anybody would watch a video where it's just got like some sound stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But some of my successful short videos were just me walking across the gravel and videoing my feet walking.
Really?
And recording that. I don't think I say anything in those videos, and walking across leaves, but there is something in the human soul that recognizes that. Oh yeah, I've walked through dried leaves before, and that is exactly the noise that it makes, and it touches you in some way. So
yeah,
I totally agree. YouTube and to let people, I mean, if you make a rap song that's popular, why shouldn't you be able to monetize your channel and make money? You have shortcutted the whole music industry and all the overhead that goes with it by just uploading your video. And if it's a good song, you're going to get a reward for that. I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it's brilliant.
It's great. It's very, entrepreneur forward. It's very libertarian. It's very cut out the middleman. And I always liked that stuff. You mentioned disinformation in, this sphere, and I'm thinking the prepping sphere and the homesteading sphere. Is there any bad advice that you've heard out there that comes to your mind that you would just say, no, this is totally wrong? Why are people suggesting this?
One thing that stood out to me, and I don't think the person who was trying to put this information out understood why it would be a bad idea. And I don't want to give people the wrong impression that I'm picking on a certain barnyard animal or not, because I'm not. But ducks and turkeys carry in their gut system strep or staph. I think it might be strep, naturally. And then you see people in videos picking up these birds and like smooching on them and petting them and all this other stuff. And it's like, I don't think I would recommend that. I think you will make yourself sick and possibly get infections. I know I got skin infections and you're like, okay, but wash your hands with soap and water. True. But, when you're out doing homesteading, you're not always able to wash your hands every 5 seconds. And so and I don't blame these people at all, but it's like, look at my cute little duck, and I keep it in my house, and I put it in my bathtub, and I do all this stuff with them. They're adorable. They are. But they are also can make you sick with strep. And so stuff like that is kind of, or
I didn't know that. I had no idea.
I know.
Luckily, I'd have no ducks, and
I had ducks, and I liked my ducks, and they laid great eggs. They were high in protein, high in fat, great for baking. And I have a turkey that just wound up found a home here, and he's a great guy, turkey. I don't think of him as a human or anything like that, but it's like I also make sure if I have interactions with him to try not to touch him, to make sure his bedding was dry, and not let him walk around in his own droppings and things. And that's an obvious on a homestead, but if you're a person who free ranges your birds and things like that, you just be careful. You just, treat him differently. I don't pick him up and hug him and kiss him or any of that stuff, even though he is sort of like a pet, like just boundaries. And then when you think about gardening, even if people are trying to tell you what works in their area, it's not exactly disinformation, but it can be misinformation for you if you're in Alaska and this guy's in Florida. These the temperatures and the rain and all that stuff are going to be different. And so he may recommend a certain way to plant your tomatoes. That's not going to do you any good. And that's just common sense, but it can be anything like that. Another example for prepping. God bless these people. I love this family. They came to one of the campouts, and they had been listening to someone who recommended all this stuff to take with them. And it had to do with the second Exodus, which is a whole nother interesting conversation. But the person had recommended all sorts of things, including a small iron oven, and they brought it with them. And the way the campout was laid out, everyone was going to walk a quarter mile. And so they brought all these things that this person recommended be a bug out kind of essential, and tried to haul it all down the hill here and exhausted themselves. And it's like, no, not everything needs to be in your bug out bag. Not everything needs to be part of what you're going to be doing. When you're bugging out, it's meant to be like for 72 hours. So there's a lot of things that people say, oh, this wrought iron frying pan is very handy, or this special cup is super, super wonderful, or this food. Try walking with that in your rucksack for a quarter mile and say, I'm going to check this out. I'm going to check that out, because that was one reason Pastor did those bug out bag campouts. You find out pretty quickly if you have to carry stuff, what you don't need. And one of those things that I ended up doing, and it was his plan, these little miniature peanut butter cups, some canned goods, whatever. No, it's too heavy. So I wound up chia seeds, powdered soup in the foil packets, and granola. Calorie wise, that's enough calories. Like half a cup of chia in water is enough for all day. It's enough calories for one day. So I went from all this really fun food, peanut butter cups and ramen noodles and everything, to just those essentials, because it takes up almost no space, plenty of calories, just a little bit of water to reconstitute them. So that's kind of along the line of what I meant. But also political disinformation and other things like that.
I'm glad to know that it only has to be 72 hours, because it makes me feel slightly more prepared.
Right. And it's a bug out location is meant to be an alternate place where you can store some stuff, like your parents' house. If it's far enough away that you can walk to it in 3 days, then you can store stuff there. You can have, the nicer, the better not rucksack, the better like overcoat, or the better gloves, or a different water container, or, maybe even a bicycle. But the bug out bag is really meant to be just a 3-day thing. So you can cut down a lot of stuff. You don't necessarily have to have 100 foot of rope. You don't necessarily have to have a knife that long, It's like practical bug out. Yeah, very much so.
That's why I love that he did those campouts. That's smart. Yeah. Because people probably, I bet 100% of people changed what they would bring after going to that.
Absolutely. And including us. And we're supposed to be the experts. I mean, even we changed the clothing that we had, what kind of shoes, because you can have your very heavy duty hiking boots, but maybe you don't want to have them on after the 3 days worth of hiking. Maybe you want a tennis shoe or something that you can change into, or what kind of sock are you going to have? Wool socks are going to be the best, in my opinion, because they don't have to be too hot if it's not a heavyweight wool for even summertime, but they are water resistant and keep your feet wet even if they are, keep your feet warm even if they are wet. And they're also very durable.
Give us your insight on the Torah movement and how it was basically a necessary conclusion or a necessary place that the Christian church would reach. If you have thoughts about that.
Okay. So if you look at the church in America, America's not that old. We and Australia are the two youngest countries. I won't say in the world because there's probably a few others, but are a very relatively young country. And if you think about how the faith in America developed, we were talking about the Pilgrims earlier. The Pilgrims are in the 1620s, right? That's kind of when they show up. And they show up with people who want to read the Bible for themselves. And then I'm not sure about the 1720s, but I know for a fact we had a great revival here in the 1820s where you had the pastors and the preachers riding around on mules and, you know, giving these open field, a couple hundred people coming to listen to the word to bring people back. And I think that's where Mormonism sort of took off too, around the 1800s. And then in the 1920s, we had the rise of Pentecostalism, and I'm pretty sure it started in California. And it was actually started by a woman. And so the faith in America as a church, it's like we're all kind of Baptist for a little while, and then there's a Pentecostal thing. And then here we come to the 2020s, and we have all these Torah people who are, if you think about the history of the church in general, when you start with Yeshua's crucifixion, within 300 years, the Catholic Church becomes a big thing. And it kind of changes the way the faith looks, right? Well, we're almost 300 years. We're 260 some years into America. And so our churches have been developing. And we've developed, as you know, we've got people who think snake handling is part of a church, service. We've got Baptists and we've got Pentecostals and we've got Methodists and all the different Primitive Baptist and First Baptist and Second Baptist, all these different things. And the people who are inspired to be pastors have not always been God inspired in America. And we know that. We know we've had televangelists and other people who do it for the money and the power. And I think our audience, the humans, the people who have been sitting in the pews, for at least some of us, we wanted to get as close to God as we could. And so we started to read the word and actually study it and then look into its history, because that Bible was not started by an American. An American did not write that Bible. Jesus was not an American surfer. He was not blonde and blue-eyed, and he didn't have a tan and a lot of us Americans think about this religion as ours because that's what we were raised in, but we didn't create it. And so it has a whole history. The Bible has a whole history of the people and the places that it actually happened. And they're real. And so people will say things like, oh, the Bible's a bunch of stories, they're fantasies. No. The Jordan River's there. The Mediterranean Sea is there. The mountains they mention are there. Those people in the book were there. And Romans and Greeks and, Assyrians and Goliath and his Philistines. They were there. All these people were there. The Canaanites were there. And so this story really is historical. And so for our history, Americans' history in our faith, for whatever reason, at the turn of the century, as we went from the 1990s to 2000, a bunch of us had this awakening in us to really delve into the basis of our faith and our religions. And that's when we started to see this book as a whole book, not two separate books. Even though there's a little bit of Malachi then hops into the gospel, seems like a little bit of a time change in there. It's still a real historical time frame. 4000 BC to 33 AD is a real thing. And so now we're 2,000 years later. We need to look into the history of it. We don't know anything about that stuff. And in looking into that, we find the truth of this story and the things that happened around it, and a system that we can then decide to adapt for ourselves and run our life. And I think that it is historically significant, at least in our country, that we had another kind of revival around 2020, every 100 years. I don't think that's coincidental. I think there's a lot going on with these periods, because we're also, and I'll get into climate change real quick. 1916, there's a 30-foot snowfall in the Alps. That's in the middle of World War I. So we've got Austrian and Italian soldiers up there fighting, and this winter, it buries them and it freezes them. And it stays that way for 100 years. And all this climate change stuff that they're talking about is true. The climate changes, absolutely. 100 years later, because there's a warming trend, at least for a little while, this snow and ice starts melting. And they can access the caves, the weapons, the equipment, the bodies of these soldiers who fought up there and were there 100 years frozen in time. And they can go into the caves they dug into the side of the mountains and see where the person's pen and paper and the notes they took and their boots and their glasses and their binoculars and everything are there. So it's the argument that it's cyclical, because in 1916, before this huge freeze, everything was thawed. They were up there fighting in regular uniforms. The temperature was such that there was no snow and stuff. And then this freeze happens and they are literally frozen in time. Same thing with some of our lakes and some of our oceans. Like the Mediterranean Sea receding exposed a ship that was from Jesus's time that was in the on the bank of the sea. So 2,000 years ago, the temperature that it is now was the temperature it was then when that people were fishing around the ocean, and then it gets a hole and it's right there on the bank and then it's covered. And just the way that things are going, it's now the ocean and the water receding back down to that level finds that ship. And we've got some of those happening up in the Great Lakes too.
So you're linking that to like this revealing of scripture past covered up in the past, basically?
It's right. It's 100-year cycle, a spiritual cycle, if you want to call it that. You can draw that conclusion that people of faith who are looking for it find a truth and say, yep. And it's the same Bible. It's a story that is 6,000 years old and yet still is very, very appealing, still makes sense. And the Lord is still a guiding force as he always has been for people who say, yeah, this makes total sense, and I want to live this way. I want to follow a system that is going to reward me for staying in the boundaries and punish me if I'm outside of them.
I agree. I just think it was one thing that helped me wrap my mind around how could the majority of Christians miss this, was realizing that the Reformation happened 1,500 years after Yeshua. Mm-hmm. That was 1,500 years where the church at large unanimously almost was wrong about something. Big stuff. Mm-hmm. Or added a bunch of weird stuff to the true faith.
Right.
And the way things should be practiced.
Yeah.
And it's a good analogy you use, because we're uncovering this stuff as time changes. And then I think second Reformation or third or fourth or whatever Reformation we're in now, it's like we're trying to get back to what they were doing in the first century.
Right, and bring it back to just the purity of the message that's in that word, the story, and then the guidelines, the morals for how you're supposed to live your life. And I just see the pattern. I see the pattern of the every 100 years unfolding for our country and our faith walk, and also just it's parallel. The temperature thing also happening. It's like we've been in a mini ice age for the last 100 years. And yeah, they're talking about it's affecting things. Well, yeah, temperature change does affect stuff, but is it necessarily something to panic about? I don't think so. And I am elated about the faith thing. I'm super excited and happy to be a part of this awakening.
So are you glad that you came to this understanding of the Bible?
I think I'm super glad, and I feel like it has uniquely armed me to explain it to other people, but also to be happy and peaceful in my own mind with the choice I have made and the life that we're living. Now, does that mean I'm perfect? No, of course not. I'm a human. I'm not perfect. But it gives me a sense of peace to know that I've looked at other ways, and this one made the most sense to me. And on all those levels that we've talked about in the past, that I am a good neighbor, that I am hopefully a good child to my remaining parent, that I'm a good citizen, that I'm not causing mayhem in my own society, and that I am trying to help other people. It inspires me to want to. Sometimes I'm spontaneously told give money to people, and I do it. Sometimes I'm spontaneously told to give someone a ride, and I do it. And I enjoy that. I enjoy when I make sure to quiet my mind and say, Lord, my hands are available right now. What do you want me to do? Because he's given me things to do. That I helped an old lady. She's standing at a gas station, and I'm an old lady going to a gas station too, right? But she's standing there with a credit card, and she's just not, she's like pushing and she's not able to pump. And I'm like, ma'am, do you need some help? And she's like, yeah, I just can't make this thing happen. I said, just wait. And I took her card in, and I talked to the guy, and I said, look, she's tried already. She can't get the machine to make it work. Just reset it and whatever. And then I came out and pumped her gas for her and gave her card back and said, you're good to go. And that was just a little thing. And it wasn't me. I just happened to pray that day. Hey, I've got a little time on my hands. If there's someone you want to be helped, you know, show her to me. And it happened to be that lady. And that made me really happy.
It's so cool. You're walking by the Spirit. It's like you're living by the Spirit.
Right? And it's not just me. Anyone can do that who's in relationship with the Lord and offers their assistance, because he needs physical hands down here to do some stuff. He can supernaturally do all sorts of things, but every once in a while. And I just really enjoy that. So yeah, I think this is a culmination of everything that's happened to me in my life spiritually, as a Catholic, as an agnostic, as a Mormon, you know, as someone reading about the Pilgrims. I think it's a culmination of that. I was talking to a sister recently. We went out to dinner, and I told her, you know, as a pastor's wife, am I helping you? You know, what am I doing for you all? Because I know what you're doing for me. Like, I didn't have any sisters, and now there's 6 or 7 ladies in the congregation, and we've shared testimony, and we're trying to support each other. And it's really nice for me because I had only brothers. And I said, that's what you all are bringing for me. What am I doing for you? And she goes, you can explain the word to us, and we need that. And that's where I was like, oh, thank you. I feel useful, because as you know, like, our degree is not exactly something that people are just dying to, you know, yes, we will hire you for sure kind of thing. But yeah, no, it made me feel really good that I can bring that. And I feel like it's something that someone like you or I thinks is important, but a lot of people start to read a Bible and go, I don't understand that. I don't know what they're talking about. What are these names? How do I pronounce these things? And we can explain it. And I'm really happy about that.
Maybe last one or one of the last of two.
Or maybe three.
Yeah, maybe.
We'll edit.
Do you have any lessons learned, like doing this walk or the community or the homesteading or any of it that you would like to share with people?
Okay, that's a really good question. One of the lessons learned is if you're going to do community, the people who come to you, you have to vet them. You really do. You have to look into them as people and what is motivating them to want to live in community. Because there are awesome people who are going to bring something to the table. And then there are people who are running away from stuff and are looking to come and just live off you without contributing anything. And I think that's unfair. I think it's unfair. If you think you want to live in community, you have to take a hard look at yourself and say, what will I bring to the community? Because am I going to be the one who's just sitting there saying, well, I'm physically unable to add anything. I'm not trying to pick on anyone, but you have to be practical about this stuff, especially our community. I should caveat that, because if you have a community that got way better infrastructure than ours, then you'll be able to accept a lot of different people and they'll be comfortable doing it. If you're coming to an off-grid, hardly developed thing like ours, you have to be physically fit. You have to be willing and harsh, living in harsh conditions to be able to be outdoors and be hot and be cold and physically work hard, plant your own food and all that. And if you're not, then this is not the particular community model or design for you. Now, it's unique to us because as a pastoral couple, we are supposed to try to help people. And so if you come and your marriage is in bad shape and you're looking to be cured, it's not a bad idea to go where you have a pastor and his wife, because they should be able to give you some advice on your marriage. And if you listen and do the things, you can repair it. But if you're about to get divorced and you're running to a community to solve that issue, like that's not the heart and the mind to come to a community. Or if you're terribly allergic to the outdoors or animals, you might want to focus your community in a different direction. Maybe we're doing aquaponics instead of having to get right up next to cows and milk them and all that stuff, if you get my drift. So just, if you're going to try to start a community, keep that in mind and be able to codify, to describe the goals of your community, what you want to accomplish, what skills people would need to bring. And also you have to decide about money issues, and there's a million different ways. And so some people say everyone's going to pool all their money. Some people say, 30% of whatever you take or 10%, or we're going to, as a community, start a business and we're all going to work in it, and we're all going to, whatever we accomplish will be what we get paid. All these things should be done before you do it if you can. So that's one of the words of wisdom. Let me think about the Torah. The Torah wisdom is keep an open mind and don't expect to get everything all at once. Try to join up with other Torah people who can help you. But if you can't, understand you're going to sit where you are and start to prepare to be a Torah person, if that makes sense. So read your word, watch videos, try to start keeping track of calendar stuff, because calendar stuff does become important. And it's not like your calendar that you're buying at Walmart. It's online, but it's a different one. And you're going to want to know what a day a new moon is. You're going to want to be able to count the days in that month. And it's not hard to do, but you need to educate yourself on that.
It's all new. It's all new, isn't it? For people, it's all new to them. It's like no one thinks about this stuff until...
A lot of calendars already have these things on them, and you don't understand it. They may have a new moon on the new moons. And a lot of the modern calendars go first day to sixth day. You know, Sunday is the first day of the calendar, and Shabbat is the seventh day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so they're laid out that way without us consciously understanding why it was done that way. And you can type in Google, you know, sundown in my area, and it'll tell you to the minute. So you'll know that Friday to Saturday at dusk, you can find those times out just by Googling it. So if you're going to do it, I suggest you try to hook up with Torah people and learn some of these little nuances. But if you read the word, especially Leviticus 23, that's a good place to start for some of these things. Watch some videos and prepare yourself. If you're all by yourself, you can still start to learn these things. So when you do come into a congregation, you'll be able to blend into it easier than just showing up and going, I have no idea what I'm doing. It's like, okay, we'll start at ground zero again, but you'll save yourself time and effort to try to educate yourself in that. Off-grid, get my book, Homestead Hints. It'll get you started. Again, just be realistic in what you want to do, even on your off-grid house or property. Do you want to see if you can be totally self-sufficient, or are you okay with, I'll just go to a local farmer's market, or, you know, I'll use Walmart. I don't mind doing that. I don't have to try to butcher a cow myself. You know, decide those things for yourself and what you're willing to live with. Are you okay washing dishes by hand, or do you want to have some sort of little dishwasher set up on your property, your homestead? Do you want to be off grid? Do you want to be on grid? You know, and all that information is available now. So just do your research and figure out for yourself what you actually want.
I think that's smart. And then, okay, maybe this last thing. Is there anything you want to say to the greater Torah community at large?
Yes. And that's a great question. So the hardest thing we have found in this community is getting along with the brothers and the sisters in the faith, because there are a lot of different opinions and a lot of different ways of doing things. It can be very difficult. The number one thing is to follow the guidelines in the Word for if you find you're having a problem with a brother or sister. Do not do the whisper behind somebody's back, try to get everybody on your side, and then Shanghai that brother or sister with, aha, we got you. It's outlined. It's in Matthew. You go to that brother or sister in private. You discuss this issue you have with them with an eye to gain that brother or sister, because that's what it says. It doesn't say so you can Shanghai them and now you're angry at each other and you're never talking again, which guilty, right? Everyone's guilty of doing that at some time. But try to honestly settle it between the two of you. And then if that doesn't work, get your witness, have that conversation. And if that still doesn't work, go to your congregation or your group and have that conversation and try to settle differences and come to understandings, because people are difficult. People are not easy, but you're trying to become part of that bigger family, and you're stronger when you're in a group. And who knows when that might be important to all of us. When the faith is challenged in some way or another, you could be in an area where that other Torah person is the only one, and you need each other to do Shabbat, to keep a feast, because no one else around you understands it or wants to do it with you. So, yeah, that is my message to all of us. Try to do it in a biblical way and get along with the other believers in the movement, whether they're different or not. My husband has a really good saying: if you believe Yeshua is the Messiah and you're trying to keep Torah, then we can fellowship.
I think that's beautiful, and it's so necessary. It's so important, because, you know, there is an enemy actively trying to break us apart.
Absolutely.
If it's true that we found some truth that's important, then why would he not try and mess all that up? Luckily the Bible, like you said, has the answer to those things. And so following is so important. I totally agree.
Yeah. Just read your word and keep walking forward in your path. Stay on that straight and narrow. It's a great place. I love it.
Well, then I guess thank you so much for being on the show.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I love talking. I love discussing these things. It's actually fun for me.
Good, me too. I guess until we meet again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for watching this show. Please like, share, subscribe. Tell everyone you know about the Life Podcast. We need your help. Please do this. We can't do it on our own. You think we can. You think that we're successful because we have these nice microphones and cameras, but we can't do this without you. We need you, and we need your support. Go to patreon.com/thelifewithluke and give us money so we can do this better. We need to do it better.